the spirit of Hanukkah endured. The idea that when you stand true to your values, to your faith, to your way of life, that ultimately, when you stand with God, things will endure. That even though it may seem dark, the story of Hanukkah reminds us that there is light to be found, and that ultimately we are the ones responsible for bringing that light into the world.
Hanukkah is about miracles, the unbelievable defeat of a tyrannical regime, the incredible rescue of the Holy Temple, and the supernatural gift of light. The story goes that during the temple's reconsecration, the Maccabees discovered a single jar of pure oil. It was just enough to light the grand menorah, but only for one night. Yet inexplicably, the oil not only lasted through the night, but for 8 whole days, feeding the eternal flame. The following year, the 8-day Hanukkah holiday was born, what the Gospel of John calls the Feast of Dedication in chapter 10, verse 22. Now, more than 2,000 years later, some believe that this feast has become more commercial and less spiritual. But for Ze'ev Orenstein, Director of International Affairs at the City of David, ancient Jerusalem, Hanukkah remains a testament to the Jewish faith and a hallmark of the Maccabee legacy.
What is so special about Hanukkah? What does the word Hanukkah even mean? Hanukkah means dedication. What is being dedicated? What we're celebrating on Hanukkah is the rededication of the temple. When the Greeks defiled the temple atop the Temple Mount, one of the first goals, once the rebellion against the Greeks begins, is to take back the temple, to take back the Temple Mount, to take back Jerusalem. Early on in the rebellion against the Greeks, Mattathias and his sons, together with those fighting alongside them, are able to take back the Temple Mount. But they're devastated once they enter inside, because they see to what extent the Greeks had desecrated the temple, had defiled the temple and every part of it, including the Holy of Holies, including the altar. So they couldn't just restart the service. They understood that they would first have to repurify the entire temple complex. And that took time. But eventually they're able to cleanse the whole temple, and they're ready to start the temple service once again. And one of the central pillars of the temple service is the daily lighting of the menorah. And there's a problem, because the only way you can light the menorah is with special olive oil made exclusively for that purpose. But what did the Greeks do? The Greeks, in part of their desecration of the temple, desecrated all of the oil that had been sealed and set aside for the lighting of the menorah. So when the Maccabees come in and want to restart the temple service, they want to light the menorah, they're stuck. They don't have any oil. Until one small flask of oil is discovered, still sealed, still kosher for use in the lighting of the menorah. But there's a problem, because this one flask will only last for one day. And it will take many days before new olive oil will be ready for use in the temple. And so the Maccabees, who themselves were priests, they had a dilemma. Should they light the menorah with that one flask of oil that they had, hoping, believing that some way things would work out? They decided to light anyway. And ultimately that oil, it kept burning. Not for one day, not for 2 days, not for 3, not for 4, 5, 6, or 7, but it kept burning for 8 days. Now, what are some of the customs and traditions that people who practice the Hanukkah festival today, that they take part in? The central tradition that we have on Hanukkah is, of course, to light the menorah, or as we say in Hebrew, the Chanukiah, the Hanukkah lamp. Because one of the central elements of the festival is to publicize the miracle, to increase light. And that's why the families, when they're lighting these Chanukiot or menorahs, they're lighting them in the window or in the door frame, where people passing by will be able to see that light and to be uplifted by that light, by that miracle, as a reminder that in many ways today, we're all lamplighters. We're all striving to bring light into the world, to our own lives, to our families, to our communities, to our nations, and really to the whole world. One teaching in our faith is a little bit of light drives away a lot of darkness. And Hanukkah comes in the middle of the winter, at perhaps the darkest time of the year, where the sun sets really early. And at that moment, at perhaps the darkest time of the year, it's when we're bringing the most light into the world, to remind ourselves and everyone else that no matter how dark it might be around us, there's always light that we can shine. Another custom that we have on the Hanukkah festival is related to the miracle of the oil. Well, Jewish tradition has come up with a few very clever ways, which is, in short, to eat foods that are saturated in oil. So one of the most common foods is donuts. We're talking about a unique type of donut called a sufganiyah that you find in Israel, fried in oil. And there are all sorts of different kinds with different flavors. And when you walk the streets of Jerusalem, it's become a big business seeing all the different kinds of sufganiyot. But the reason why we're eating donuts on Hanukkah is not just because donuts are delicious, but it's meant to remind us of the miracle of the oil. And one of the things that we try to do in our faith is not just to remember intellectually, but what are the things we can do in our lives to, in some physical manifestation, bring that miracle to life. Now, there's one other custom that has really entered the hearts of small children, and that is what is known as the small toy known as a dreidel. A four-sided top, which has on each side a Hebrew letter. There are two different versions of this top. The four letters spell out the words, Nes Gadol Haya Po, a great miracle happened here in Jerusalem. Or if you're outside of Israel, it's Nes Gadol Haya Sham, a great miracle happened there, referring to, of course, the land of Israel, but the person being somewhere else. Now, what was the purpose of this small little top? And the answer is very simple. When the Greeks outlawed the study of Torah, that was something that the Jewish people would not abide. And so what would they do? They would study the Torah in hiding. And they would have the kids sitting outside somewhere playing with this little top. And when the kids would see the Greek mercenaries coming, they would shout out, "The Greeks are coming, the Greeks are coming." Still today, Jewish children play this game of dreidel. Depending on the letter that the top falls out on, you either earn chocolate coins or you lose chocolate coins. And it's why ultimately, both for its heartwarming and stomach-filling customs, but also the message being so relevant and so uplifting that makes Hanukkah one of the most beloved festivals of our day today. The fact that for the last 2,000 plus years, here in the land of Israel, here in Jerusalem, and throughout the world, where Jews have been celebrating this festival, lighting the menorah in their windows, in far-flung communities, in the most unexpected of places, shows that ultimately the spirit of the Maccabees, the spirit of Hanukkah endured. The idea that when you stand true to your values, to your faith, to your way of life, that ultimately, when you stand with God, things will endure. That even though it may seem dark, the story of Hanukkah reminds us that there is light to be found. and that ultimately we are the ones responsible for bringing that light into the world.
Thank you for joining us as we provide a spiritual insight of what God is doing in Israel and in the Middle East. If you want to learn more about what God is doing in Israel, make sure to visit us on our webpage and follow us on social media. Shalom, and God bless you from Jerusalem.